episode of the Waypoint podcast. This time I have a very special guest with me, the man, the myth, the legend, Ezra Green.
John, how are you? How's everything?
Good, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Can't believe I'm finally here.
Yeah, I know. These guys were going to kill me.
Well, listen, maybe they should kill you for other reasons, but not for that.
Hey, wait a minute. That I'm not a huge
You're
fan
a good
of.
guy.
So what's going on, man? What brings you here?
Nothing. We just wanted to talk about OZSC and the special things we're doing, and would love to get the shareholders and the listeners involved and see what's going on out there.
So here's one thing before we get into it. I pronounce it OZSC. You pronounce it OZSC. What is the right way to say it?
I think it's OZSC. I call it sometimes Z-pop, and of course we have good times with it. We have little songs that have Z-pop, but we have a good time with it.
See, I do OZSC because it means Aussie in Chinese.
Okay.
So for me, I'm like, But all right, so listen, let's just jump into it. With the first thing being the question that I'm sure is on everybody's minds, Neogrid. It's kind of your baby.
Yeah, well, it's something that I dug into a couple of years ago when, after being in the industry, the energy industry, and specifically renewables, I got involved with battery storage, which takes on a whole life of its own and a level of complexity depending on what you're using it for. But I seem to have stumbled onto something which allows us to distribute energy unconventionally, which means we don't have to rely on the existing utility cables. We don't have to worry about municipalities as far as the permitting goes. We don't have to concern ourselves with different areas, whether it's residential or too compact. We're able to bring the energy directly to the EV user, whether it be a truck or it be a car, and of course to the home, but that's a whole different market which we're not approaching yet but plan on.
Right, and I mean, look, that was I think the biggest concern that people had back when Biden made that announcement about 600,000 new EV chargers was, right now the grid can't support that. We have this old dilapidated infrastructure that's not, it's not really conducive to EV charging, and more importantly to, a larger demand for,
Our utility grid cannot support electric vehicles within another couple of years. Period. That's a statement. I cannot see how on earth they're going to be able to rebuild it or, supply any kind of magic wand to be able to clearly allow it to handle these kinds of loads. When you have 1 million EVs on the road in a centralized area, let's say call it New York City or any of the majors like San Francisco or Los Angeles, you have a grid that's already maxed out. There is no way on earth you will be able to add the energy produced from 36 megawatts per day of solar energy that will feed these cars. You're not going to do it. But on top of that, you have a bigger problem. You have to use what's called a level 3 charger, which requires about 300 kilowatts of energy. You can do it with 200, but it just takes a little bit longer, and you end up with a problem, and that's called, you need the same amount of energy to charge your car as it does to charge 5 homes for an entire day. So if you have a 100 kilowatt battery in your car, you literally need the same amount of energy that powers 5 homes, which usually burns about 20 kilowatt hours a day. So you're talking about an enormous amount of energy concentrated into one vehicle in 15 minutes to half an hour. Can't do it. The grid is not built for that, and it's certainly not built for 1 million of those going on every day. So that's part of the Neogrid solution, where it would have to be a rollout. We're coming much closer to doing demonstrations and doing our the distributed energy portion. But the cool part is even though we're not going to give away the secret sauce just yet, What we're gonna do is, I can discuss lightly that we took a 100-year-old model and we modernized it to where it'll work now and it works well into the future, and it can be expanded on, it can be moved, it can be relocated. It's essentially a modular way of delivering energy, whether it be to neighborhoods or to energy charging systems.
Well, see, that's interesting because I think that's kind of where we're going, right? I mean, there are people that think, oh, the energy companies are going to bring the infrastructure up to snuff. To them, I say, look at the fiber rollout that's gone out through this country, where we spent billions of dollars in taxpayer money in order to upgrade from copper to fiber. We're still not even remotely there yet. I don't think the energy companies are going to do it. So a lot of articles are pointing to microgrids and small startup municipalities that are essentially just going to create their own little grid for a town. It sounds like Neogrid's a good fit for that. I don't think it's gonna. I think it's like EV and renewables in general. It's not gonna just be one specific thing. It's not just gonna be solar or just gonna be hydro or just geothermal for heating a house. It's gonna be this mix and match, to see what best suits the area.
Oh, absolutely. But what's going to happen, I think, to alleviate the stress for the homeowner, that homes are going to have their own energy systems on it. They're going to have to, you may be able to be tied to the utility as a simple backup or a trickle feed into your batteries. But when you're buying a home for, $500,000, these homes are now going to be selling for $600,000 because they're going to be coming with a $50,000 or a $100,000 storage system. Just like you were going to buy a house 100 years ago, it may or may not would have had a boiler or a heating system. So if you bought the house with the heating system or hot water system, you were absolutely going to be paying 20-30% more. So that's the transition that's going to start happening, especially since the Tesla movement and the whole Elon Musk awareness, where storage is becoming a household name now, and it's becoming more accepted, and the fear of them catching fire and exploding, all these myths are going away. Well, it's not so much a myth that it can catch fire, and it's not fun to watch.
Oh, I'm sure.
Or be part of.
Lithium fires are very scary.
But the point being is so is oil and gasoline, which is part of our everyday lives because we drive around with it with 20 gallons in our, by the trunk of our cars. So we're kind of used to this kind of threatened life.
Right.
But I think lithiums are substantially safer than driving around with 20 gallons of a volatile liquid, and certainly hydrogen, although there's room for that as well. That's where I think we're going. So the energy will be produced in a solar systems. In a given solar system, we'll have a separate trickle feed from the utility, but it'll all be stored on site. So even if you did have a blackout, you would theoretically be able to sustain yourself for a week or two if the sun did not shine. So that's where we're headed.
So, we've talked about Neogrid being a part of the solution and how, you're kind of retuning a 100-year-old idea. Can you give us a little bit of insight on what Neogrid is?
Yeah, it's the method in which we distribute the energy. Yes, there are some patents that are going to be filed around some of the mechanicals, and of course there's going to be some software involved, but it's simply the way you transport it, the way you move it, the way it's switching hands. Everybody knows if you take electricity and you take it from one battery to the other, every time you have a connection, you're producing heat, and heat is an energy loss. So the biggest problem is moving energy or transporting it or transferring it and keeping your losses low. Well, that's one of the solutions we have, and that's one of the methods that we're using in being able to get energy to almost anybody, almost anywhere, under any circumstances. You have a lot of people now, or several companies, which are using batteries by the electric vehicle stations. So this way you're able to discharge it into the vehicle at the rate that the manufacturer designed in the software. So you can have a capability of discharging the electricity in 5 to 10 minutes. However, the car might not be able to accept it that quickly. So depending on the car will depend on the effectiveness of it. However, the short story is that if we can get enough systems out there, it'll start solving part of the problem by having the energy on site and not relying on the utilities to give you permission to discharge that energy. So in short, even though you have a level 3, if the utility is not good to you that day, it's only going to have the power of a level 2, which is useless.
And actually, that's one of the biggest things I don't think people realize with Tesla's superchargers is if you look on the superchargers, you'll see an A and a B. You'll see A1, 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. The reason that they do that is the superchargers, the way that they're tapped, they'll give you full rate until somebody pulls into the stall next to you. If you're on A and they're on B, the rate gets cut in half for both because the utility company won't allow them to draw that much power.
Case in point.
So what we're seeing is gas generators being hidden behind these these big fences that they're essentially using to generate electricity for these chargers. So you have EVs being powered off of gasoline.
Well, but this is part of the transition, and I know there's a lot of environmentalists and there's reporters, no, this is not really, economical, this is look, you got to start somewhere. You have to make the transition. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to get blends of 20% solar with 80% fossil. This is just going to change over time, and by the time 2040 comes, it'll probably be the exact opposite, 80-20. 80% solar, 20% coming out of the utility. I know they have mandates to be 100% by 2030 or whatever it is. But let's put that aside and stop criticizing, the process that us humans have built for ourselves. It might not be perfect, but it's happening. And everybody should be thrilled by it. I've been in renewable energy for 20 years, over 20 years. And I've literally lived the transition, and I think it's fantastic. And I'm excited to see all the new ideas that are springing up and how the environment is hopefully going to start reversing itself if it hasn't already. And this is part of the process. And I think people should support it instead of tear it apart.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Because what was the argument 10, 15 years ago? Oh, it's too cost expensive, or, it doesn't make sense for us to do this. It's only going to change X, Y, or Z. I think the greatest thing about mankind itself is the fact that we take these baby steps and somebody else comes in and builds off the existing process. If we just stopped and said, hey, you know what, sticks that are sharpened on the end, yeah, that's good enough. Why are we going to bother trying to polish a rock? We'd still be in the Stone Age. Somebody else has to pick it up and keep going with it. And like I said, back to the whole Neogrid thing, that's what we're doing. We're picking up a 100-year-old process, and we're saying, you know what, there's still more that can be done with this.
Listen, when you eat dinner at your table, you're using the utensils that are hundreds of years old, if not thousands of years old, in one capacity or the other. And like you said, from splitting shale as a knife, we're now using specialized stainless steel and all sorts of other elements in there to make them fancy, but it's still a knife. A knife is a knife. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're just making a very well rounded distribution system, just modernizing it tremendously, that's all, for the future.
So let's talk EVs a little bit more, because you and I have some of the same frustrations when it comes to the charging networks, EVs in general. I mean, please, the floor is yours.
Well, like I said, I'm glad to see that EVs are starting to hit mainstream, getting a lot of excitement. I think the manufacturers have a lot to learn about how to deal with EVs and the customer. I think that's going to be an interesting transition to watch. I'm actually writing a book right now for distribution shortly from OZSC through OZSC for the operation of EV and how to care for them. And it's not it's agnostic. It's not to any one manufacturer, because virtually every manufacturer has their own software, has their own battery configuration, their own recommendations, and literally their own physical shape, weight, and distances and applications. From Porsche, which I thought, excuse me, Porsche.
I see, we're gonna get some angry comments now.
Well, to some just general family sedans. And also you have the last mile vehicles, the ones that are good for 50 miles, to go, once or twice a week, which is phenomenal. I think that's great. I personally use an electric bike to get around the city because it's substantially cheaper, a lot easier, and a heck of a lot of fun, I'll tell you that. So I have an electric mountain bike, and I have a good time with it. So the question is, what do I think? I think the revolution has happened, and I think everybody's gotten on board to where they just have to make the switch. They've committed so many billions of dollars, and I can't imagine anything that would reverse it or slow it to any appreciable amount into the population. And as far as the actual designs, that's just going to be up to the new, the new manufacturers on how they're going to reflect that electric image, that futuristic image. And as for the technology, I can talk all day about battery, the battery technologies, what I think is going to happen, what can be done now, and there's so many directions to go.
So there is a formula that you and I want to discuss, but before we get into it, I know people are going to ask. It should be out by now, the white paper, hopefully. I don't want to get too much into it, just in case, but
yeah, sure.
it's been a topic for a while now. It's obviously something that you and I have been working on together. The whole idea of using a distributed network in order to calculate EV charging costs.
Right.
So there's, many people may not know this. You're the, we'll say, almost inventor of the formula that's being run.
Well, there's different ways of calculating environmental credits. You have carbon footprints, but there's also a thing which became popular among the wealthy, and I'll explain that a little further. It's called a carbon offset, where the big thing was where I think President Gore who was a huge proponent of the environment and saving it specifically, but he used to fly around in a jet, which people used to throw rotten tomatoes at him, as, contradiction. But of course, look, he's trying to help the masses. And, these unfortunately are expenses. However, so people started applying these little ways of justifying it, but it actually makes sense. So if you're flying a jet that gets 1,000 miles per gallon, it's irrelevant, whatever it is, or it burns a gallon a second, whatever, a minute, I mean. So let's say you use a fuel that reduces that to half a gallon a minute, and you're using, it's an environmentally friendly. Are you supposed to get credit for it? I mean, is your glass now half full, or are you still going to look at it as you're burning the half gallon? But you don't only have to look at it as a private jet. You can apply it to almost everything you do, where you're helping the environment by switching your company to selling different types of products, or distributing them in some way. There's a value to it, or switching what you're already selling to a natural product, like even window frames. They're now made out of plant-based and vines, and instead of processed cardboard with all the wonderful trimmings that go with it. It's just changing, and there's an offset to that. So this is one way to capture the values, because it's truly calculable, and it can truly be tracked, and it certainly can be applied.
Right. I worked for a manufacturing company for a while, and our whole thing was that we were technically a green company. And it had nothing to do with the fact that our processes were green, because they weren't.
Right.
We just bought a crap ton of carbon offsets.
Okay.
So we were technically a green company.
Listen, again, is that a perfect world? No, it's not, of course, but you gotta start somewhere.
And I think that's a really important thing, is somebody's still doing the work, somebody's still putting the effort into it, and financing it allows them to do more and allows us to lower our carbon footprint. I mean, it's not an ideal situation, but I'd rather that than nothing.
The lesson that I've proved just by virtue of living through it is solar energy did not become popular or truly commercialized until capitalism got involved. Because it took it from a grassroots movement, which is fine for certain areas and certain people, but not society as a whole. But when we can capitalize it and the government comes in and realizes the investment is worth it, and this isn't almost anything, where rebates are applied or tax breaks, or discounts, importing from friends, et cetera, et cetera. And then that allows it to generate capital. Once you have Wall Street involved, which may be a dirty word to some people, but you can't get a gallon of milk without Wall Street being involved, because that's part of our, the economic basis of the world. And that's what makes it a true business, and that's what's happening with the electric vehicle. 100 years ago, you couldn't go 10 miles on an electric vehicle. And 100 years ago, they had them. And it took them, God knows how long, to recharge them. Now we're talking about going 400 or 500 miles and recharging it in 10 minutes. Can't argue with that.
No, and it's just going to get better. It's just going to get better. Right, so, talking about that formula a little bit and talking about the credits, let's jump in a little bit on the white paper, because we've had some questions about why we're doing blockchain technology and how it relates to solar and to EV. And I want to clear some of it up, and then I kind of want to pass it over to you. For me, for the reason why I was... So for me, the reason that I was so adamant about us doing it this way was, trying to be not just cost effective, but also trying to be cost effective. Let's be honest. Let's call a horse a horse. So here's the thing. Why are we doing it this way? There's going to be a lot of mathematical calculations that take place in any type of EV charging. Hey, how much are we supposed to charge? Especially with fluctuating power. Certain areas may cost more or less than others. And when you tie a Neogrid into it, it really throws a whole wrench into the situation on cost. So in a good way, not in a bad way. So my idea was, okay, instead of doing AWS or Microsoft's Azure, what can we do to reduce the cost on this and keep our overhead low? And that's why for us, the answer is a distributed computing network. So how are we going to do that? Essentially the same way that you would mine for Bitcoin, for example. You have an application that's constantly running numbers, trying to solve a mathematical formula. You're going to just do the same thing for us. I liken it to folding at home, which is, if you have a gaming computer, you can essentially give up some of your computing horsepower to universities so that they can fold proteins. So that allows, this was a big thing during COVID. It allowed them to fold the proteins.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Beautiful story.
It created one of the largest distributed supercomputers on the planet, and it was to help fight COVID. And we're going to do something similar. It gives us access to raw computational power that makes these mathematical calculations easier for us. And the whole thing is it's separated out in a way that if we no longer require that, it doesn't absolutely kill the project. And if we need more power, we can always ramp it up. So what is that formula and why is it so important? That I'm going to kick over to my good friend Ezra.
John, thank you for the easy questions.
Sorry.
The way you have to look at energy is that virtually, with very few exceptions, maybe some private electricity utility providers, all of them have solar energy or wind solar energy is the most valuable. It has the highest price in the carbon offset, and it just has value to the utilities because it's basically conditioned electricity. And wind is not, it has a lower price point. And then there's every variable in between, from hydro to hydrogen, and then you have plant-based. But let's just keep it to solar for the conversation and the formula. So no matter what utility you go to, and there's about 1,000 of them in this country, you can find out exactly how much renewable energy and how it's divided up in their portfolio. So they all have mandates, which renewable energy credits are based on. So they all have mandates to be able to produce a certain amount of renewable to be supplied to the public, and the public means anybody with a meter that's a client. They're not discerning between commercial or residential. So let's say hypothetically 10% of their output is produced from renewable energy. So when you buy that electricity, you're contributing to the production of renewable energy. But if you're saving or spending, I should say, 20 cents a kilowatt hour for that electricity, 10% of that came from renewable. That has a value to it. That's an offset. There is, the people who scream, this is not a real renewable, well, that's not true. It's 10% renewable. Next year it's going to be 25% renewable. The year after, maybe 27. But this continues on all the time. And then you have peak times, and you have the wind that comes in during the evening when solar is not produced. So you have all these equations which can all be monitored, and the way it's monitored is all of this is public knowledge, because you can track virtually every solar installation in this country that's tied to anything that's called a grid. If it's a legitimate utility and not a microgrid where it's closed off, which in and of itself is, as long as they don't have a gas generator, is 100% renewable. But given the general population, your equation is the percentage of the solar or the renewable energy that goes into it is being repurposed. So you have a spread, a value spread right there that you can apply to your ledger. And that trickles down into everything. You can include it in a home. You can include it literally in the cost of anything, as long as it can be tracked, the actual economics of it. But utilities are the easiest. So when you fill up your car and you get it from a utility like Con Edison, about 20, I think it's 20%. They do have to double check it, verify it, but I believe 20% renewables or 15% of it is renewable energy. I think that's fantastic.
Jump right into it. The bread and butter of the situation, the whole reason PCTI was an important piece of the puzzle, and I think what is going to be the most important part of our new infrastructure rollout in the United States. Let's talk energy storage.
Again, you give me the easy ones, don't you?
Yeah, I only ever do easy.
Thanks, Sean. Look, energy storage, just like solar, is starting to become mainstream. It's starting to become a household word, and people they don't understand it, but they're getting there. They know it's part of the everyday utility life. But the size of the market, I don't even attempt to calculate it, because it truly is incalculable because of what I had said earlier in the podcast. The utilities cannot handle the production and distribution of the electricity that this country will need with the progress and deployment of the energy vehicle market, and that especially includes the commercial market, not just the residential. Once you start getting trucks and the last mile delivery guys, your consumption is astronomical.
And that's going to require not only the distribution process, but the ability to store this energy at multiple points along the distribution line. So in heavily congested areas, you could be talking about having 5 megawatt systems on virtually every trunk line in this amazing web that Con Edison has built over the past 120 years. And storage is going to be a main part of it. In rural areas, it's going to be part of it so you never have another blackout again. Except for physical devastation, we can't help that. That's Mother Nature. But when you get into Southern California, where the distribution network, you just don't even know where to start to rebuild it. So that's why we've gone very heavily into the storage industry, which like I said, I had gotten involved with several years ago. And the benefits to our company are simply where you lay out the money in contract with the utility. They allow you to recharge it at night when electricity is very inexpensive because nobody's using it, and sometimes it's renewable energy, and there I go back to the carbon offset value, and it recharges your battery at a discounted rate. But part of the other part of the contract is that we have to discharge it into the system, the same utility line, but at the high peak levels when you and I go home and start flipping on air conditioners and our pools if we have one.
So it's almost like a distributed load balancing system.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. But trying to do it on a magnitude of these scales is daunting. So it's not only the problem that brings us to deploying it. There's just not enough lithium to go around to fill the need, but there are other very, very usable technologies that will be coming out for storage. However, lithium ion tends to be the best, and it does have a fear factor with fire, and there are issues, no question. But it doesn't go boom in the sense that, an oil tanker is devastation, or a natural gas explosion. That's devastation.
Right.
So we don't have that with lithium, but there is an issue.
A lithium fire is an inconvenience. A tanker setting on fire is just complete annihilation.
Right. So if we had invented the gas vehicle today, it never would have made it past the first usable step, if you think about it.
Yeah, if you told me, hey, here's a vehicle, guess how it moves? We set off small explosions in a metal tank.
That's exactly what
they would have said, you're insane.
Well, people are being called insane today, but for other reasons. The value of filling up and discharging to the Con Ed system, they pay us a premium per kilowatt hour. So as an exaggerated situation, we buy it for 1 penny per kilowatt hour, and we resell it the next day for 20 cents a kilowatt hour.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's
well, again, we're talking
there's financing involved. It's really a complex step. But the other issue that we deal with is the regulations that we have to go through. So you don't just buy a battery, call up Con Ed, sign a contract, shake hands, put this thing in, flip the switch, and get your check at the end of the month. These things take many months to get installed. There's a lot of work, a lot of paperwork that has to be done, which we're moving forward on now. And by the way, STEM was wonderful. We love dealing with them. They're terrific. I know them for a few years, and they're a wonderful group. But we're working with them on designing these systems, but en masse. Not one or two here, 2 or 3 there. We're looking both coasts and some of the key areas, maybe like Arizona, Texas, and sections like that. The one thing we will not do is play at the 100 megawatt or gigawatt. We're not interested in that market. There's a whole different layer of boys boys and girls that play in that arena. We're in the smaller section because we feel that's the sweet spot. We understand it. It's accessible and has a manageable layer of politics and filing fees and process that allows us to be very mobile.
Right. It's a lot easier to convince a ZBA, hey, we want to put one battery here, than it does to, hey, we want to put what is a nuclear power plant of of batteries in your backyard.
For that, you need some very important people on your board, and it takes the Elon Musks of the world,
right,
to do those kind of things. Listen, I call everybody has a thermostat, and our thermostat, we found it, and we want to deal with the local higher distribution, of course, but it's got a different financial base to it. So between investors and the municipalities, we're doing pretty damn well. I'll tell you that.
Right. And for anybody that's getting upset, because I'm sure somebody will, about why aren't we going after the larger projects? Sometimes they're just not financially beneficial in order to go after them. It can be cool to do one or two to say, yeah, we did it. But I got a buddy that's a builder. He's done multi-million-dollar houses. He's done $200,000 houses. He'd rather do 5 $200,000 houses and build them all at the same time than one mansion that's going to take the same amount of time and he's going to make less money on.
Yeah, it depends on how you build. And there's some guys, they'll only build, let's say, like you said, 100 homes. And then there's others who prefer, to renovate the home.
Right.
Instead, because and their margins are much better. You just have to be able to turn it on. It just depends on what you build for.
Yeah. It's your niche. You have to find your niche. You can't. Yeah. The biggest mistake anybody ever makes in business is.
It's also cool keeping all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Never do that. So if we went after a 400 megawatt deal, the amount of resources we would have to put into just that one project, it's crazy. Because if we don't win the bid, what are you going to do the rest of the year? So do podcasts? I'll do. Well,
you and I could do podcasts all the time. I love my job.
We could have our breakfast club.
Oh, that's a great idea.
So, but anyways, the distributed part, we're dealing in different markets. We're trying to get away from reliant on ITCs, which is very hard to do. But our rollout plan using storage for electric vehicles, the Neogrid, is going to be quite lucrative, and we believe it's going to be quite lucrative because it allows us. And, it reduces our costs, our overhead substantially, which increases our profit margins. And that's going to be reflected in what we've been doing these past few months.
Well, and I think that's an important discussion to have about, again, PCTI, for example.
Yeah.
Part of the OZSC brand is, you're talking about the 400 megawatt projects. If you're one of the only people that can build this one specific part for these jobs, but each job takes about a year or two, it doesn't always financially make sense, which is why sometimes, you do have to retool the process, or you have to expand into other sectors that complement what you're doing.
Yeah, there's some very interesting things that are going on at PCTI, but you'll excuse me and, please forgive me, shareholders. Because of the status we have, I'm kind of precluded from discussing what is actually transpiring behind those doors. So, with all due respect, I have to suggest something else.
Stay tuned. That's all we can say on that one.
Please stay tuned.
So, all right. So, for the last thing, let's jump into something we may get a little bit of hate for, but I think it's important.
John, don't do that.
Oh no, we're gonna do it. Let's talk about the industry that we're in, and the supposed costs about breaking into this industry and doing things differently.
Listen, that can take us into next week as far as the conversation goes. But one of the strong points that you have to understand is that in the short 7 months that I've been here, we have broken into several multi-billion-dollar industries, which we are going to have a strong presence in, because we've already made those inroads.
And, all this comes out, with some of the progress that we've made, but the people we've aligned ourselves with are also multi-billion dollar, 800-pound gorillas, and we have superior relationships with them that go back a couple of years, not only through me, but just in general, in the industry I've been dealing, and we've been able to pull this together. Brian is a phenomenal CEO. He really sees vision, he understands it, and he knows how to create something collectively. And that's what we've done. I mean, just to give a for instance, one of the markets we're in, and we're going to be expanding on and taking a bite of that apple, is simple math. 1 million electric vehicles holds 100 kilowatt hours, and it's being sold for 50 cents a kilowatt hour, hypothetically, in New York City. Just do the math. That's $500,000, right? But they're refilling all the time. So if you have 1 million vehicles putting in, it's $50 million. Very bad math, sorry everybody. 1 million vehicles, and they fill up their cars, half of that, or half of that twice a month. You're talking about tens of millions of dollars. And that's just one area of where you can be reselling electric to the masses. You have California, you have 6 key states, or 7 maybe at this point. And these are all requiring, and the simple number is, it's starting at roughly $125 million per month in electrical sales just for electric vehicles. And those are residential cars. I'm not even talking about trucks. I'm not talking about the last mile. So we've managed to get into this industry with not a lot further to go. That's just one. And we're going to be capturing part of that market. What it is, we'll talk about some other time. But we've done this with only several $1 million. We have receivables now. We have at least $3 to $5 million in sales out there just, in turnover. It could be more, I don't follow it, but that's roughly the numbers that we turn over constantly. And with our profit margins, it's fantastic. Then we have the battery storage, which is 25-year contracts with the utility. That's AAA rated client. It's like owning an apartment building or a shopping center, and your clients will never leave you, and you're guaranteed your money. You cannot get better clients, and we're in the industry. How is this not success? Now the rest of it just has to start playing out. So our entry fees, our entry costs, it took us 6 months, really? How is that negative? I mean, of course it could appear negative, but we've done a fantastic job, I feel, and it's only getting better because now we have the momentum. We have the key people, the key partners, the key financiers. The structure is there. We have our expediters, and we have enormous amounts of property which we build off of. So I think we've done an incredible job in a very, very short period of time, which most people don't even understand. That's the interesting part. They don't even understand the market, and we're writing the book on it, and quite literally too.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that people kind of forget sometimes. It is the OTC. A lot of these things are treated like startups, and to an extent, they are. But the whole thing is, what you guys have accomplished in a few short months. There are multi-million-dollar companies receiving millions, if not billions, in capital funding, trying to do the same thing and getting nowhere.
Absolutely.
I think part of the issue ends up being, one, there's obviously an inherent distrust in the OTC, and some of it warranted. I mean, there are some bad companies out there. But two, we do things a little more publicly, which is great. It lets us have more direct connections to our investors, and it keeps them more up to date on things. But as a result, there's delays in business all the time. I mean, how many times have you and I had a phone call with somebody where at the last minute they're like, hey, we need to push this to next Tuesday, something came up. Anybody that owns a
call it
business.
every day.
Yeah, trust me too. Oh no, my kid's coughing. But the whole thing is, when you're not a public company, these are just things that go on in daily life, and you kind of forget about them the next day.
Well, one of our big issues was post-COVID, steel, cold rolled steel, went from roughly $500 a ton, and it went to over $2,000 a ton. The cost of shipping something across the country, it used to be $2,000-3,000, a skid of 40,000 pounds. $20,000 now. Now, I mean, it's going down now, but this also slows things down, and then of course people don't want to work. So we've weathered that. We're beyond that. But these, again, just to go back, there's always something, but that's called business. And I feel we persevered through the hardest parts, and there's always a little bit of egg on the wall. But you know what? If you're not breaking any windows, I don't think you're working hard enough. And that's what we do. I know the first 4 months, literally running 18-hour days, 7 days a week, no exaggeration. Well, maybe a little, 15-hour days. But literally the point being is that this was a movement and a drive to get something done, and we're accomplishing it. And there's still a long way to go, but we've got the momentum behind us now. And that's where you have to get that momentum, and we have it. We built it, and I'm very proud of it. And I think everybody, eventually will see, and it'll make sense.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I want to personally give you some credit for, because I feel like, a lot of the times people forget just how important our whole team is. Everybody brings different things to the table. This is an individual that could probably go work for any major firm right now, and I don't think they'd even ask him, hey, what do you want to be paid? They'd probably just give it to you. This is the man writing the book on the industry that they're breaking into. And again, this kind of experience, 20 years in an industry that's, just now up and coming, I don't think there's anything more valuable. So for you to be, fully locked in, this is what you're working on, this is what you're building. I think that speaks volumes to what you guys see in the future, what you're trying to accomplish, and, quite frankly, I don't think it can be entirely monetary, because I know for a fact you could go work for these other firms if that was the only thing.
Well, look, I think everybody gets offers from time to time, and, you want to be recruited, and, I've certainly had, my share, but I'm here, believe it or not, because of Brian. I really enjoy working with him. I think he's a visionary. He understands the market. He understands finance, and we get along famously. We don't argue because we see each other. We literally run in parallel, accomplishing to the same goal. And if we have to, we'll run in tandem. We work very well together. He understands what I'm trying to get done. And very rarely are there any kind of rubs, which you would expect a lot more, especially in this type of environment. And if there have been, obviously stressful situations, but that happens anytime you're building something so complicated and large. I need to add that, there's a huge footprint that we made, and it's going to start unveiling itself. And I think it is just with our friends STEM alone should open the door a bit to we're not fooling around. And that's what I like, and that's why I'm here, is because Brian and I work together well, and he allows and affords us to produce things like this.
Well, I think, I've said it before, I think legacy is important. And for Brian, I know that's his big thing, is leaving behind a good legacy.
Yeah.
I truly think you guys are going to reshape this whole EV market.
Oh, I absolutely think so. I think we're going to attract the right partners, and I'll leave that, because I don't want to get too carried away But I think we're definitely going to attract some, the correct people who understand magnitude and distributed, as far as our systems go. And I think, the future is incredibly bright with the ITC, the investment tax credit. Hoping we're going to get it, expanded back to 30% or more and make it a direct cash payment. I think, when that happens, that's a nuclear bomb, but in a good way.
That may be the only time somebody's ever uttered that sentence.
It really opens up the business. It changes everything in a great way.
Now, before we wrap it up, could you explain that a little bit more, just because I'm not familiar with it?
The investment tax credit affords you 30% to get back from the government. So in very, very simple terms, it reduces your simple payback on an investment by 30%. So, and it comes in a cash payment. So if I spend, meaning OZSC, we invest $1 million in a system, the government sends us a check for $300,000.
Okay.
Literally. And then you go into depreciation and, other opportunities and other kind of rebates that local municipalities might have, like NYSERDA, which is the New York State Research and Development Authority. They have rebates, and depending on where it is, depends on how much, but that could be another $100,000 or $200,000 off of that $1 million. And then calculating the 5-year accelerated depreciation, I think the first year is 19, whatever, I'm not sure, or 32, I'm not sure what that first year is, but it's substantial, and it adds up, and it can cover the cost of your financing, your cost of money. So if you're getting it at 6%, maybe it'll neutralize it, I don't know, but it's good.
Right, so essentially, this opens up the market even further, because now it's not just people with cash to burn.
Yeah, it's, finding tax partners, you don't have to, because it's a cash payment also. So it's not passed yet, but as it's getting closer and closer to it, and we're really expecting it, and then that's just going to take us to a whole nother level. And it also will allow, I financially modeled it with Brian, the Neogrids, and we went over it 1,000 times, and we purposely left out the ITC, and the numbers work, famously. So getting the ITC just affords us even greater depth into what we can do and how we can distribute it, and attract the regional investor, meaning deploying in a regional fashion.
So just to clarify, they don't need it, it's just found money if we get it.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, look, I've taken up far too much of your time today, to which I am deeply sorry.
I would love to do this more often, I like it.
Let's do it.
Well, listen, can't scare me.
No, you can't scare me either. Well, okay, that's not true.
All right, yeah, maybe not, never mind.
So,
No, thanks for having me, I appreciate it.
no, seriously, Ezra, thank you. Anytime you want to come on, I think next time we're going to try to get Tim and Chris on as well. I know people want to hear from them. And you know what? Maybe the next one will be you, me, and Brian. We'll see.
Sure, let's have a party.
All right. Well, guys, that is the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us. Ezra, once again, thank you so much for giving me your time. Look
Thank
forward
you.
to seeing what you guys build. And I look forward to everybody reading this white paper so that they stop bothering me about it.
Listen, they should. You did a beautiful job on it, right?
Yeah. We'll see.